Before this story ends, ask yourself one question. How well do you really know the people living next door? Stay until the end, because the truth behind this story may change the way you see your own neighbors. Sophia didn't move into that apartment because she wanted a new beginning. She moved because she had no other choice. After losing her job and ending a long relationship that had left her emotionally drained, she needed somewhere affordable, somewhere quiet, somewhere that would allow her to rebuild her life without attention. And when she first saw the aging apartment building at the end of a narrow street, it seemed exactly like what she needed. Modest, quiet, almost invisible to the outside world, which was precisely why she chose it. During her first days there, everything felt ordinary. The hallway lights flickered slightly at night, the elevator moved slower than it should, and the residents rarely spoke to each other. But none of that worried her, because silence felt safer than chaos, and privacy felt more valuable than comfort. Until the moment she met the neighbor across the hall, a man in his late 50s who introduced himself with a calm voice and a polite smile. Someone who appeared harmless at first glance, the kind of neighbor most people would quickly forget. Yet from the very first conversation, something about him left Sophia unsettled. Because instead of asking simple questions like most strangers would, he commented on how late she had arrived the previous night, mentioning the exact time as if he had been watching the hallway clock. And although she forced a polite smile in return, a quiet unease settled into her thoughts, because she had returned home well past midnight and had seen no one in the hallway at the time. Over the following days, small incidents began to pile up, not dramatic enough to cause alarm, but frequent enough to create doubt. He greeted her each morning with observations that felt too specific, mentioning delivery packages she hadn't yet collected, referring casually to visitors who had stayed only briefly, even commenting once that she seemed tired after returning home late, a detail that struck her deeply because she had entered her apartment silently and closed the door without turning on the hallway light. And for the first time since moving in, Sophia began to feel something she had worked so hard to escape the sensation of being watched. The situation escalated one evening after a long shift at her new job, when she returned home exhausted and noticed a folded piece of paper lying just inside the shadow of her doorframe, something that clearly had not been there earlier. And as she bent down to pick it up, her fingers hesitated because the quiet hallway suddenly felt heavier than usual, as if the air itself carried tension. The message written on the paper was short but chilling, containing only a few uneven words. Do what you are told, or things will change. There was no signature, no instructions, no explanation, only an implication that someone expected obedience. And that realization transformed her unease into fear. Not the loud, explosive kind, but the slow, suffocating kind that lingers in silence and turns ordinary sounds into warnings. That night, sleep never came easily, because every sound outside her door felt deliberate. Every creak of the building sounded like movement, and every shadow seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at it. Yet, what frightened her most was not the message itself, but the possibility that someone nearby believed they had power over her. And over the next several days, her routine began to change. Not because she wanted to, but because fear demanded it. She left for work earlier than usual, returned home at unpredictable hours, and avoided unnecessary conversation, hoping that distance would restore control. But control never returned, because the neighbor continued appearing at the exact moment she stepped outside, greeting her politely, smiling as if nothing unusual had happened. And that contrast between his calm demeanor and her rising anxiety made the situation feel even more unnatural. Eventually, exhaustion replaced fear, and exhaustion gave birth to anger, because Sophia realized that living in constant fear meant surrendering the very life she was trying to rebuild. And surrender was something she refused to accept, so instead of hiding, she began observing, paying attention not to what frightened her, but to what repeated itself, noting the times the neighbor opened his door, the moments he lingered in the hallway, the occasions when he spoke without being prompted. And slowly, a pattern emerged, one so consistent that coincidence became impossible to believe. Leading her to take the first step toward reclaiming control, she purchased a small security camera, something simple and inexpensive, explaining to herself that it was only for reassurance. Yet deep inside, she understood that reassurance was no longer enough. She needed proof. Installing the camera felt like crossing an invisible boundary, because from that moment forward, fear no longer ruled alone. Evidence began to take shape. Night after night, the recordings captured subtle movements, shadows passing near her door, footsteps that paused without reason. And then, finally, the moment that changed everything. The neighbor appeared outside her door long after midnight, standing motionless for several minutes before leaning closer as if listening to sounds inside her apartment. The image replayed in her mind again and again. Not because it surprised her, but because it confirmed what she had feared all along. And strangely, confirmation brought clarity rather than panic, because once suspicion turned into fact, uncertainty disappeared, and where uncertainty once lived, strategy took its place. Over the following days, Sophia documented everything carefully, organizing recordings, saving timestamps, noting behaviors, transforming fear into structure and confusion into evidence. And when the time finally came to present what she had gathered, the outcome did not arrive in the form of confrontation or chaos, but through quiet accountability, because the man who believed silence would protect him had overlooked one simple truth. Patience creates patterns, patterns create proof, and proof has the power to turn fear into freedom, leaving behind a lesson Sophia would never forget. That sometimes the greatest strength is not in fighting back loudly, but in refusing to remain powerless and silent. Sometimes fear doesn't come from the dark, it comes from the people closest to us. What do you think really happened behind that door? Was it obsession, control, or something even darker? Leave your theory in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories that reveal the hidden truths behind ordinary lives, subscribe to Shadow Truths, because some secrets are too disturbing to stay buried.